Episode 9, The Fractured Code, Isaiah 59:14-15. So justice is driven back, and righteousness stands at a distance. Truth has stumbled in the streets. Honesty cannot enter. Truth is nowhere to be found, and whoever shuns evil becomes a prey. The tension crackled in the air like static electricity the moment Jacob turned the corner. His old crew wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. Darnell, who had climbed up the ranks in Jacob's absence, didn't say much, but his body language spoke volumes. Arms crossed, jaw clenched, eyes narrowing whenever Jacob was near. The younger guys kept a careful distance, watching the subtle power play unfold in silence. Even without an outright confrontation, the shift in the hierarchy felt like a storm brewing just out of view. Jacob's return didn't just unsettle the balance, it exposed the cracks already there. No one said it out loud, but the whispers were deafening. Someone had dropped a name to get Jacob locked up back then, and Darnell's circle was where most eyes were falling. The block reeled when word broke that the boy from Miller Street didn't make it. He was just another casualty, just another name added to the tally, but this one felt closer. Elijah stood on the sidelines of the court that day, staring at nothing, the burnout in his hands forgotten. For a moment, it looked like he might crumble under the weight of it all, but then something shifted in him. His back straightened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and he barked out instructions for drills louder than I'd ever heard before. The kids moved like their lives depended on it, because maybe now they understood they did. That boy's death wasn't a story told in whispers anymore. It was loud. It was real. And for Elijah, it lit a fire I hadn't seen before. Something primal. Something that refused to let this place take another one of his kids. The weight at home was unbearable. Mom was missing more shifts now. Her hollow cheeks and sunken eyes, a reminder of the ticking clock over our heads. The coughs were constant, wet and jagged, echoing through our apartment like a cruel metronome. Nights felt endless as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the math in my head the way she would at the kitchen table. But no matter how many overtime hours I managed to squeeze out of the fast food joint, it never added up. The bills kept coming, and each one felt bigger than the last. Something had to give. The idea was a seed planted deep in my brain, growing quietly but persistently. I hated myself for thinking it, but it was there, dark and insidious, like a bruise under my skin. The police were closing in on the shooter now. Everyone could feel it. There was talk about a suspect who disappeared right after Jacob's arrest, someone who'd slipped under the radar like smoke through a keyhole. I didn't know his name, but I could see the ripple effects already. The block was quieter in a way that wasn't comforting. It was the kind of quiet that comes when people are waiting for something dangerous to finish unfolding. Jacob didn't say much about it, but you could see it in his eyes, the way his twitching fingers betrayed the fact that he was doing the math in his head, figuring out where this left him. The silence spoke for itself. If the real shooter came into focus, whoever had set Jacob up would be next under the microscope. It was Shey Shey's return that really threw people off. She'd been laying low ever since everything went down with Jacob and the police, but now she wasn't just back. She was different. The warmth she used to carry around like a second skin had hardened into something sharp and cold, like a blade left out in the rain. The way she moved was cautious, deliberate, like a predator sizing up its surroundings. Her laugh, once brash and infectious, was now a bitter echo. People tried to greet her, but her eyes were dead things, unreadable and unsettling. Whatever she'd been through while she was gone, it had stripped her down to the bare metal. When I saw her leaning against the corner store, the same place I'd seen Jacob not too long ago, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The cameras loomed larger than before, those unblinking lenses casting judgment on everything they saw. I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just watching the block, they were changing it. Kids avoided certain corners now, more conscious than ever of who might be capturing their every move. Looking up at those mechanical eyes made me think of Elijah, of his fight to keep the kids out of the OG's grip, and I realized the fight wasn't fair. It never had been. The cameras didn't care about the story behind the struggle, they just recorded it, making monsters and victims impossible to tell apart. Out here, justice wasn't something handed down, it was something improvised, messy, and unforgiving. At night, my thoughts kept circling back to the boy who died. His face hovered in the back of my mind like a shadow that refused to fade. The memory of his grin during drills, a painful contrast to what had been taken from him. The question wasn't who did it. That answer would come out eventually. The question was why. Why it was always the youngest, the brightest, the ones who deserved the most time who ended up as bloodstains on cracked pavement. There was no shortage of reasons people would give, but none of them felt like enough. The truth was, the streets took what they wanted, and nobody could explain why. Nobody could ever give it back. As I left the corner store with the bag of cheap groceries, I saw Shey Shey again, standing under the same busted streetlight, but this time, she looked at me. Her eyes, cruel and calculating, pinned me right where I stood. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but then she didn't. Instead, she nodded, just once, as if we'd silently agreed on something we hadn't even discussed. My chest tightened, but I couldn't name the feeling. Fear, worry, anticipation. Before I could process it, a siren wailed nearby. It screeched, cutting through the night like a warning. Shey Shey's silhouette dissolved into the darkness, leaving me standing there, hyper aware of the warmth of the bag in my hands and the coldness of everything else around me.